this. Let's bring in Professor Alan Dershowitz, Professor Emeritus at Harvard Law School. He joins us this evening from Miami, Florida. Professor Dershowitz, I asked you on this program more than a month ago about this issue when it came up with some incidents at Harvard. At that time, I recall, you demanded that the president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, resign. You were a little ahead of the curve, as it turned out, in this regard.
Well, and I wanted to resign, not so much because of what she said about free speech. I'm in favor of free speech. Let students say whatever they want. What I'm opposed to is the double standard. President Gay is part of this whole diversity, equity, inclusion nonsense bureaucracy that doesn't allow students to have free speech when it comes to criticizing other minorities and other groups. If you say anything suggestive of anything critical of blacks or gays or transgender people, you're going to be disciplined, but you can say anything you want about Jews. So it's not that I want to restrict free speech. I want more free speech. I want a single standard to be applicable to all groups and not a double standard to be applied to Jews and their nation state.
Well, then let's look at what happened, because Elizabeth McGill has resigned. There's a search committee that's going to be looking to replace her, but I haven't heard anything about committees to rework the university speech code, either at U of Penn or Harvard or MIT as well. I mean, how likely do you think that process is likely to happen? How should it happen?
Well, it's more than the speech codes. It's the attitude of the universities. The attitudes of the universities are that there's a double standard. The DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, excludes Jews. It presents Jews as oppressors, and Jews are the villains, and the other groups are the victims. And so until that mindset is totally discredited, we're going to see more and more anti-Semitism. The DEI bureaucracy has been the hotbed of anti-Semitism, along with these special departments now, Department of, Black Studies, Women's Studies, Gay Studies. All of those departments have been at the forefront of the anti-Semitism at universities. So getting rid of a president here and there is not going to solve the problem. The problem is much, much deeper than that at American universities.
Right. Now, let's be realistic. President McGill's resignation was likely due in part from a major donor to the University of Pennsylvania saying he would withhold or withdraw a $100 million donation. You've had some very prominent donors to Harvard in the business community speak out in a similar way about it. How much does that process going to impact on what are private universities? They're not subject to government oversight. So if any pressure is going to come, it's likely to come from those kind of figures.
So they are subject to government oversight because they receive government funding. For example, Harvard is being investigated by the Department of Education. I volunteered to be a whistleblower. I probably know more about the workings of Harvard than almost anybody else. I've been a professor there for 60 years. I know where all the bodies are buried. I know about the history of anti-Semitism that goes back to the 1910s. I know about how when I got to Harvard in 1964, nobody who was Jewish could be a dean or a president. They've had a double standard for years, and they are being investigated, and private donors have a role to play. Now, there are a group of professors now that are standing up and defending President Gay, saying that she's a hero of free speech. And I responded to that letter by the faculty saying this is not about restricting free speech. We want more free speech. We want the same standards to apply to every single group. We don't want one standard to apply to those who are regarded as oppressors, and another standard to apply for those who are deemed to be oppressed. And so, this is a worldwide problem when we see today that a young woman who stands for the environmental movement has now basically put the environmental movement at war against Israel as well. Israel, one of the best environmental countries in the world. But the entire left, hard left, has declared war on Israel, as a great French philosopher today on television said the tactics of Nazism from the hard right have now been transposed to the hard left. And so the problem is much, much deeper than the problem of who will be the president of any given university, or even whether the speech codes, which are generally written in very general terms, are applied fairly.
All right. I just want to briefly move on. Of course, you are opined publicly about Israel on a number of issues. You did write a piece that was published, I believe it was in the New York Post this week, criticizing Lloyd Austin.
I've also written a whole book.
And you've written a whole book there.
On October 7th, I wrote it in 35 days, War Against the Jews, how to end Hamas barbarism. I've written 20 op-eds since October 7th. You know, if I were a young man, I'd be volunteering to fight for the IDF. I'm now only old enough to write articles and write books and be on television, but I'm going to continue to defend Israel in the court of public opinion.
Right. Let me ask you about the
power to do it.
Right. One particular op-ed criticizing Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, who particularly a quote that he made that you can't win an urban warfare the lesson is not that you can win an urban warfare by protecting civilians. The lesson is that you can only win an urban warfare by protecting civilians, seemingly to criticize how the IDF is conducting its operations in Gaza. I just want you to comment on that.
Well, he's just dead wrong. History proves the opposite. When the United States totally destroyed Germany, totally destroyed Japan, killed hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians, the civilians ultimately thanked the United States and said, thank you for ridding us of these horrors of Nazism and of Imperial Japan. And I suspect the same thing might be true here. If Israel manages to rid Gaza of Hamas, I think it will be more likely to be accepted by the people of Hamas. But in any event, nobody is driving anybody today into Hamas's arms. Something like 70% of the civilians of Hamas have supported the barbarism of October 7th. The numbers of innocent civilians in Gaza are who were killed are a fraction of what's been put out in the media. There are many, many people who don't wear the green headdress, but they do help allow their houses to be used for tunnels and for rockets and for hiding combatants. These are not innocent people, and many of the people who were killed by rockets which misfired from Gaza. So we have to be careful about these phony statistics that are being put out. But the main point is that Israel can do the greatest favor to the people of Gaza if it makes sure that Hamas has no role to play in Gaza's future.
All right, Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you.